Hello, this is Shan, Chandrasekar, welcoming you to another delightful part of our programming. We are delighted to welcome a very distinguished guest to the program here with us today, Honorable Jack Layton, who is the leader of the NDP at the national level. Jack, welcome to the show. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you too.
Jack, there's a very interesting quotation here. It says, only one leader, Jack Layton, can mount this kind of a campaign against status quo. Tell me about it.
Well, I think we do need some change in Canada. When we look around at the different issues that families are facing, for example, it's sad to see that for working families, they're not really getting ahead the way they would like to in many cases. And so we're looking to see some reforms, particularly around education. I know a lot of families now who are saying the tuition costs and the costs of their children going to university are getting so high that it's very, very discouraging, because I know Olivia's parents, for example, came here from Hong Kong, and they came here, they suffered a significant reduction in standard of living. Olivia's mom used to be a teacher in Hong Kong, but they had a dream for their child to have a better life and a good education. And she ended up cleaning toilets in the Delta Chelsea and doing laundry there for 30 years. But their dream came true, because
Wonderful.
Olivia is now on the Toronto City Council. She's a fellow of the College of Art and a trained sculptor, and you can see the happiness in her mother's eyes. But that dream is being taken away bit by bit as education becomes more and more expensive, so that it's becoming really something that's available only for the very affluent families. And we think that's not right, not in Canada. I know Olivia always says that her family chose Canada because it was a place where it didn't matter how well off you were going to get the same high quality health care, public health care, started by Tommy Douglas and the NDP in Saskatchewan, now a national value.
And who was your icon when you were very young?
Inspiration, really.
And because you were at McGill at that time, and I guess from what I heard, that you were tremendously inspired by Tommy Douglas.
Well, he spoke out around human rights in a way that was very, very courageous. And he also has this wonderful expression that I have on my wall with a photograph of him. He said, "Courage, my friends, it is never too late to make a better world."
Oh, fantastic.
I think you put that philosophy into operation with the growth of what you're doing here too, Shan. But of course, education then is absolutely fundamental. And what we see is the cost of post-secondary education is getting so high that some families just aren't able to handle it. And immigrant families especially typically are having lower incomes. Sometimes they're professionals. They come to this country. I take taxis a lot. I don't have my own car, and they take me to the airport and so on when I'm not on my bicycle. And the number of talented people we have who are not able to use their full talents. They were told when they came to Canada, they got points on their immigration assessment for their professional background, and naturally they assumed that this would mean we wanted them in their professional capacity here in Canada, and they find the doors closed. It's a great tragedy and a waste of talent. But it also means that they're working long hours at low pay, and they're struggling as to whether they can get their kids into that school the way they dreamed they could. So I think that we've got to get back to funding our post-secondary education system.
You just mentioned about the point, of the foreign-trained professionals, who are engineers and doctors and chartered accountants and dentists who are driving cabs in the country. Is there anything you can, sort of throw light on that, whether you would move in the direction of better accreditation for foreign-trained professionals in this country?
Yes, and it's something the NDP has pushed hard, both provincially in our provinces and federally. I think it's making its way onto the debating floor now. More of the parties are taking a look at it. This is good. And in a minority parliament, we can push very, very hard. There's some very important innovations we could make. For example, why not allow professionals to do some pre-certification work before they come here? Because I've met so many, and the story goes like this. They come here, they want to take courses to get the various upgrading and get themselves certified, but to provide for their family and pay the very high rents, they have to work 12 and 14 hours a day. They can't take the courses. And you can see it in their eyes. It's breaking their heart that everything they worked for, they're not able to use. And my son works in a restaurant to put himself through school. Tends the bar and what have you. And there's a cook from the Tamil community. He's a trained accountant. He is an expert in forensic accounting. And yet he hasn't been able to get the time away from that cooking job, which pays the rent and puts the food on the table, to get the certification. Why not allow some of that to happen before people come here? We have the internet. And in fact, there's an experiment on the go that we want to encourage more of, to allow that to happen so that it can be a more seamless transition. How much better would it be for Canada? Those people arriving then would be paying taxes, they'd be fully integrated in the community. And not only that, but if you think about the medical professionals, we need medical professionals who speak other languages, who come from other cultural backgrounds, because that communication and the cultural sensitivity is so important when it comes to healing or prevention. It's a tragedy to see the resource wasted.
Stay tuned, we'll be right back after these messages.
Small businesses in any economy play an extremely vital role in the development of that country, and Canada is no exception. Small business is being described as the pillar of this country's industry as well, whereas multinationals sometimes are not really Canadian. What would your policies be from your perspective to sort of enhance the position of small business and a greater recognition for their contribution for Canadian economy?
Well, we think small business is very, very important, and it is where most of the jobs are created. And the amount of paperwork and regulation sometimes that applies to small business is certainly a problem, and we think that can be addressed. Also, take for example, if you're starting up your own enterprise, you know this experience, you've done it before. But imagine somebody starting out with a self-employed, they're self-employed trying to get something going. It's very difficult. Why not allow those people to have access to programs like employment insurance, paternity, maternity leave, as has recently begun to happen in Quebec, very good, the Canadian pension plan in a more effective way, etc. We think that small business should be given access to some of the kinds of programs that the very larger businesses have access to today. And that would encourage people to consider starting their own business. There wouldn't be so many obstacles facing them. And the more small businesses we start, the more likely there will be some of them that become very, very successful. And that's something that needs to be encouraged.
You graduated from McGill, and then you went ahead and you got your doctorate. Now tell me about
In fact, I think you and I were at McGill at the same time, and we were just passing. Who knows, we might have been at some of the same meetings.
Maybe, yeah. So tell me about the, your field of specialization, because from what I understand, you took some international studies, I believe.
Yes, well, my interest was in the way in which capital flows around the world, and how we can make sure that that investments in Canada are for the benefit of Canadians. And there were various efforts to try and make sure that that happens. And of course, we're now dealing with that now with the proposal of the Chinese government to actually buy some of our resources.
Right.
And that raises some important questions around sovereignty that do need to be analyzed. And I did have the chance to study how different countries had made sure that the investments from foreign investors actually help to benefit the local economy. Not to discourage foreign investment, but to make sure that it actually benefits the local citizens at the same time.
Your dad was actually a Conservative MP. Now, how did you join the NDP?
Well, as Jean Chrétien once said, that both my dad and I were Liberals once for a brief time. I was a big Pierre Trudeau supporter for the first few months of his term in office, although I have to say he turned away from some of the things that we believed in. My dad was very concerned that the Constitution was brought back to Canada without the consent of Quebec, without the support of Quebec. He said, that's going to drive us towards the possibility of separation. And it turns out he was correct. And then he was asked to run by the Conservatives. And he always said, take the opportunity to serve when it's offered to you. We had very similar values, I have to say. Of course, we had some political debates, but they were always in the context of a loving relationship between a father and a son, and it was a very, very important relationship in my life.
It's wonderful. You must have had a very interesting upbringing, because I've heard from some friends of yours that your grandfather and your grandmother were both extraordinarily kind-hearted people, that they were looking after the welfare of the blind, I believe, and they were volunteering a lot of their time. Tell me, as a child growing up, what kind of an impact did that have, that kind of charitable activity and work that was going on around you in the atmosphere in which you were brought up, the upbringing?
Actually, it did have an impact, and the more you reflect on it as you get older, where did your values come from, you can see it. I remember my parents and my grandparents taking me to the Montreal Association for the Blind which was the first school for the blind created in Canada. It was actually created by my great-grandfather, who was a blind man. Was blinded as a teenager, and he felt that blind people shouldn't have to live in poverty. They should, there should be a pension for the blind, and he campaigned for that. That there should be a school for the blind. There should be a workshop so people wouldn't be sitting at home with nothing to do. And that's where the Montreal Association got started.
You mentioned the word poverty. You championed the cause of, to a certain extent, homelessness in this country, for that matter.
Right.
You wrote a book on this.
Well, I had the chance to meet a great many homeless people. Representing downtown Toronto for years, they were right there. They were right under my window at City Hall, and you got to learn about the stories of what brought people into homelessness. And there was one common denominator, and it was that affordable housing was so hard to get, and so whatever misfortune might have befallen them on a personal level, and there are many, everyone had their different pathway, but the common issue was they couldn't find affordable housing, sometimes where they could get a little support to make their way through. And you know, it's interesting because in the minority parliament of 1972-74, when we had the NDP and the Liberals working together, a national affordable housing program resulted from that because the NDP pushed for it. And thousands, hundreds of thousands of homes were built across the country. And Canada got an international award for having the best affordable housing program in the world. That was in the early 90s. I remember talking to a hotel worker from the Punjab, and he was saying to me, oh, it's not so bad. I have this job that pays for the rent. That's a full-time job. And then I have this second job, and that covers the food and the other things our family needs. And I realized, you know, what hard work that is. And for many, they ended up homeless. We've got to start building affordable housing again.
Wonderful. How would you rate the contribution of multicultural communities in this country?
Well, Canada has been built by multicultural communities from day one. People arriving in this land with a sense of real hope and optimism. And actually, we also need to remember First Nations and the contribution that they made. And they went through some very hard times. The multicultural communities that have come to Canada have brought and continue to bring such a sense of innovation. Your stations alone, just to mention an example, first of their kind to use certain of the technologies that now all the big operators are beginning to use because they see the success. Quite often it is the immigrant community, the new arrivals, that bring the new ideas.
Jack, one more point. You just mentioned being a Canadian. You know, we are very proud of the American services as well, which are available in Canada. We strongly believe that we have to put Canada first when it comes to the Canadian broadcasting system, when it comes to culture in this country. You know, 30, 40 years ago, if CNN was on basic cable in this country, I don't think we would have been able to develop a CBC News World or a City Pulse 24. And similarly, if we had had HBO in this country, I don't think we would have had opportunity to develop a TMN or an Astral in this country.
Yes.
There's been many examples along those lines. If Nickelodeon was here, I don't think YTV would have prospered in this country. So I think the same thing holds good for Canadian culture, which is of third language as well.
We think it's very important that the various language communities receive the kind of support, encouragement, and opportunities that are available to the two founding languages. It's very important. Of course, our identity is to some degree defined by English and French, but as time goes by, it's being increasingly defined by all the other languages that we speak. And that's what makes Canada such an attractive prospect for many businesses and for many people coming here from around the world, and for tourism too. So not only that, but we can become an export center of Canadian culture in third languages, fourth, fifth, sixth languages, right around the world. And of course, you're putting this into practice yourself. We can see the employment that is created here in Canada because there are people interested in watching the programs you produce all around the world. And I think it's time that our cultural policy and our strategy through the CRTC reflected that kind of thinking. And you can be sure the NDP will be emphasizing that on an ongoing basis.
That's fantastic.
Well, this is a wonderful work in progress. You get the feeling that what's happening here is constantly growing and improving, and it's so exciting. Firsts of all kinds. I've never seen launches of new programming and new facilities such as the ones you've put on in the Sky Dome. Absolutely awesome. And also reaching across the cultures the way you do. It's not just a question of sticking in a narrow sense to a particular cultural community. You're reaching out and drawing people in, and that I think is a very Canadian way. Also, as I notice the people who work here, and the place is abuzz with employment, so there's clearly an economic benefit to the whole community. But they come from all kinds of different backgrounds. And here they are all working together from so many parts of the world. It really is very, very inspiring, and I certainly wish you well. I have no doubt that this is a project that's going to just keep on growing and keep on succeeding.
Jack, it's been an absolute pleasure having you in the program with us.
Much.
Please click on the subscribe button and notification bell so that you can be updated with all our content.